Well, good afternoon, everyone, wherever in the world that you find yourself today. And thanks for joining me to talk about SharePoint Analytics. We've only got about 60 minutes or so, of course, but we should have plenty of time. We're going to do a quick introduction, then we'll get into the nuts and bolts, and finish up hopefully with some extra time for Q&A. And just a heads up, I'm going to be talking a lot in the beginning about measuring and trending before I get into the actual tools that were part of the evaluation that can help us with that, because we do want to look at how do we make the business case for evaluating these tools. Sound good? Okay, so my name's Jonathan and I'm from Boston. Hopefully some of you have had a chance to visit here. If you haven't, I recommend that you do at some point. You may be familiar with my city from such great films as these, but we don't all talk the way they do in the movies, as you can tell from my voice. So I don't have quite an accent, and hopefully you can understand me today. Currently, I'm with a really great company in Boston. We're also in New York and Chicago and are expanding out west and down south because we were recently acquired by a larger company, Insight, but we're still called Blue Metal. I'm just about 3 years into this role. I've had about 6 years of consulting under my belt at this point, and previously I've been in a corporate role as well. I've been working with SharePoint for over 10 years now. I am not a developer, so I don't deal with code at all. My major focus is on wrestling with all those acronyms that end in M, like document management, enterprise content management, web content management, knowledge management. So here's how to ping me if you need to. This is also how you find the slides. But enough about me. Let's get into the story. So this evaluation came about from a recent project that I led for one of our clients. I can't, of course, tell you the name of the company, but I will tell you that they are a food and beverage manufacturing company. They're one of the top industry leaders in the country and also the world. So, of course, they also have employees in dozens of countries, and they have hundreds of household brand names that you probably have in your house right now. So they have a lot of market share. The website in question here was their intranet, which was actually redesigned by my company and relaunched in late 2014. They were very heavy on video content in the redesign. They had a social focus and cared a lot about personalization. Now, there were several challenges that the communications group came to us with in the context of this project. And one of them was, despite a concerted effort to tailor the intranet to the current needs of the company, there are always going to be these competing communication vehicles, and this was evident to this group at the time. Some news about the company was being disseminated by outside media outlets, which is going to happen, which causes, talks at the water cooler, people Googling and Binging things, and people using email to send out things rather than the communication vehicle of the intranet that was invested so heavily in. And actually, as I began this engagement with the client, they announced plans to merge with another industry leader. So that was right in the middle of when we were getting started with this project. So some of the main challenges in my clients' minds at the time were around communication, of course. They need to publish the appropriate news at the appropriate times. They want to maximize the investment they made in this new facility of the intranet, and as well, frankly, justifying their own jobs and proving the value that they bring to the organization, to this new management oversight that's probably going to come about as a result of this merger. So we came up with these high-level engagement objectives for the project. We wanted to learn what content is being consumed and who's consuming it, what types of content are most engaging, get some insight into what kinds of content employees respond well to, and in turn, continue to return to the intranet for. And the group's goals and objectives as well included helping to justify their own team's value in managing the intranet, and demonstrating higher employee satisfaction by having people be informed, and demonstrating hopefully higher employee engagement. And you'll see, of course, that the names have been changed to protect the innocent. I'm referring to the intranet generically as my corp town here. So basically, we're talking about trying to measure and trend user adoption and user engagement, which is not very easy off the top. We need to get down a little more deep and see what contributes to this, and how we can measure it. So I went through a whiteboarding exercise with my clients to solicit ideas for how they might want to qualify their data. In other words, how they might want to like to break it down. So here are some of the examples, and some of them include looking at the visitors themselves. What kind of people are they? Are they salaried? Are they hourly? How are they coming in and looking at the intranet? Are they using a mobile device? Are they using a desktop, a tablet? Are they using a kiosk that might be on the manufacturing floor? Are they new users? Are they new employees? If they're not a new employee but they're a new user, why haven't they used the internet before? Have they lapsed? Did they used to use the internet and no longer do? When are they coming to look at this? Are they doing this during their work hours? Are they doing it off work hours, maybe on their break? What department do these people work for? So these are all very good ideas of how we might want to break down data in looking at analytics. And I should add that we didn't just launch their new internet with no metrics capability whatsoever. Blue Metal did hook up Google Analytics for them in its very basic of configurations to get them started. But then we had this larger engagement of looking at analytics in a more holistic way. So let's get down some terms before we continue into looking at the actual tools. And this is where we're going to talk about measuring and trending. And the first one is web analytics. What is web analytics? We're looking at measuring, collecting, analyzing, and reporting on the data that a website generates. And why are we doing this? For the purpose of trying to understand and optimize the website. We got the word metric here. The metric is a measure. It's something that can be measured, and that's based on quantifiable data. At the very least, if you can't quantify something, you want to try to estimate it, and you can usually do that based on anecdotal data. But a good example here is if you went to your doctor's office, so a specific visit to your doctor, and the example of a metric could be your heart rate at the time, or maybe your blood pressure. If we look at metrics in the context of tools, what the tools usually don't do is put these things together in a nice PowerPoint deck to present to your boss. That would be ideal, right? Well, the web analytics tools mainly provide you these metrics for consumption via reports and to other systems maybe, or custom code via APIs. But you have to do a lot of the legwork in setting those up or consuming the data by the reports and putting them into a format that is presentable to your boss. Then we have this term KPI, the key performance indicator. And this is a visual indicator, but it's not just a gauge or an on-off indicator. It's something that's visual, but it has to tell a story. And it's going to tell a story about one or more of those metrics, those measurements, in context. So if we go back to our brief example before of your visit to your doctor's office, an example of the KPI could be the trend. It's very important. Of your heart rate or your blood pressure over a certain period of time. And we want to tell a story about that. So for example, if the trend is upward, we might use something visual like an up arrow to indicate that. And we might use that in conjunction with displaying the percentage of the increase over that time period to quantify how severe or not severe is that increase. And if the implication is negative, we might color that, that measurement red. If it's going down, and that's a good thing, we might color it green. So that provides some context for that story. Looking at KPIs in the context of tools, web analytics tools may provide some KPIs in dashboards. The KPIs, these are more sexy and ripe for executive consumption. However, most practical KPIs, they're usually either formulated automatically by additional software that processes the metrics from the tool via APIs, or you're going to have to manually compile them, and usually the site administrator is responsible for that. And this is because most businesses want to answer very specific questions that matter to them and monitor custom KPIs that aren't readily available as an include with a tool off the shelf. Now I want to introduce you to a bigger term which was important in the tool evaluation process, and that's framework. Here, this particular framework of four ideas served as a guide for my discussions with the client, and it also served as our format for recording and reviewing our requirements. We've got goals, which led to signals, those lead to metrics, and those lead to the KPIs. And it's very important to look at the order of these and to go in that particular order. So let's take a look at each of these four components. You need clear goals to help you choose the right metrics. You can't just start with the things you want to measure. You should select the things you want to measure based on any of these goals. And here we've got 5 categories and they all interrelate. Start off with adoption. We've got engagement, retention, task success, and happiness. Let's look at some sample goals that relate to the adoption category. These are actual goals from the actual requirements that came out of the engagement. And we got 5 of these examples here. The first one is ensuring that new employees and new users to the intranet are engaging with the content for the first time. And this includes also their email newsletter, which is a method for driving traffic to the intranet. So that needs to be taken into account. Another goal is to build up employee buy-in. The company wanted to tell their story through their communication vehicles. They want to reach their employees where they are. So that could include on their mobile device, or like I said, if they're on a manufacturing floor, that would be a kiosk for them. Giving the employees what they want. The communications group goal is to respond to popularity of content by trying to give the employees more of that kind of content. And finally, giving employees a way to think about going to the intranet first instead of using one of those other competing communication vehicles like we talked about earlier. The second category was engagement. Here are 4 examples here. Getting the employees to give feedback on content. This could include commenting on things, clicking a like button, submitting a question maybe. We have another example goal of having employees be conversant about company news with their fellow colleagues in an informed manner. So this means not relying on rumor and conjecture at the water cooler, but talking with their colleagues by being informed with actual facts about what's going on. Another goal is to try to get the executive team to choose the intranet as their communication vehicle rather than sending out a mass email, for example, or relying on another communication method. And then our last example here is getting the employees to help each other out. This views them as employees as communicators. So not just thinking about the communications group as the people communicating out on the internet, but engaging the employees to do the same and to help each other out. So that next category of retention, keeping people, keeping the users of the website. And the first example here is getting the users to return to the intranet more often. In this case, initial goal was set at more than once a week. Another one is to encourage lapsed users to return to the intranet. So users who haven't used the intranet in the past for a while, we want them to come back. And another goal, and this would help the other goals, the first two, is to reduce stale content in areas of the internet where dynamic content is expected. So if you have areas of your website where it's obvious that they're not going to change that often, that's okay. But if it's an area of the website where the expectation is that the content should be changing often and it's not, that's a way that you're going to lose users because their expectations are not being met. Here's that next category of task success. And here's 2 examples here, giving them what they need in addition to what they want. So this is things that are more transactional. Maybe they need to complete a task and they need to go into the internet to do that. Maybe there's some links or some navigation to get them to a particular place to accomplish that task. So if they can't do that easily, then that's not meeting the goal. And they may need to be able to do that via search as well. And the second example of solving users' problems by self-service where possible. So empowering users through the facility of the internet to come up with their own answers to their own questions. And that could possibly avoid a help desk call. Our final category was happiness, and here are some examples here. Happiness is more of that touchy-feely, how a user feels about using the website, which is very hard to measure. But the goals here, the first one, ensuring the employees are able to articulate the company's story. This is important to the company with employee retention and the way that employees of the company talk to other people in the company and outside the company. What does the company stand for? And the other two are very interesting to me as well. How does my work fit into the story, the company's story? And even more importantly, how does my work touch consumers? How does what I'm doing every day, indirectly or directly, affect what happens when that consumer takes that product off the shelf or maybe even consumes it? Second example of supporting a more transparent culture at the company, that's often a common goal in an organization. Decreasing frustration during activities on the intranet. So this was some feedback from the previous iteration of the intranet that they wanted to make it easier to use, less frustrating. And not indirectly influenced by that merger announcement, supporting our employees through times of change. So there's a goal for the happiness category as well. So we eventually want to think about mapping the goals, think about the framework I talked about earlier. We want to map the goals we came up with to some lower level signals, which are things we might want to consider or that we might want to monitor. So here's a sample goal, the one about getting the users to return to the intranet more often. And what might we want to consider? We might want to consider providing content that's relevant to the users. And what might we want to monitor? We might want to try to identify users who return to visit the site within, say, a week period, because our goal was looking at users that come back to the site more than once a week. So here's an example goal, and then the signals we identified for it. Here's a different one, the one about getting the employees to give feedback on content. What might we want to consider? We might want to consider identifying the posts on the internet that have high numbers of views, and then identifying those posts that have high numbers of comments. What might we want to monitor? Maybe the submitted questions about those posts. Here's a third example of giving them the goal of giving them what they need, the transactional idea. In addition to what they want, and maybe thinking about search. What do we want to consider? We might want to consider identifying the usage of those tools and links that have typically been difficult to find in the past. So relying on previous data to inform what we might want to consider. And what we want to monitor, we might want to monitor those search results, for example, for successful queries and also for failed queries. So we'll decide on things to measure, like number of homepage views and the site's bounce rate. And the measurements themselves are the key to everything, but rarely do we want to take the actual metrics and present them raw for interpretation. What we really need to do is provide some context and a story around those measurements. And this is where we get into the KPIs, the key performance indicators. And I'll present here a few varieties of examples from the project that we drew up for our client. And here's one that's a sample indication with trending. So here we've got a big number here of 57%. What is that? Well, in this example, we're saying this is the number of retained user homepage views. You take away the bounces. So that means the people that came into the website, the page loaded, and then they went somewhere else immediately. And taking that as a percentage of all the views in total. So that's 57%. And then, but we're putting it into some context because we're saying it's over a time period of 7 days. And then we're saying we had a target of 70%. And the number here, 57, we didn't make that target. So we're going to color it in a way that says that we didn't quite make what we wanted to make. And in this case, we didn't make it close at all. 57 is a long way from 70%. And then we're also presenting the trend here down at the bottom. So putting these all together in a KPI gives the measurement, but also presents it in a way that tells a story and puts it into context. Here's another same format of a KPI, but a different example. So we're looking at visits that are time-based, and we're saying, okay, what are the ones that were made off work hours? So here we've got a number of 1,600, and these number of views during off work hour segments, and we're saying that there's a time period window of 5 days here, and we had a target of 2,000. Well, this one we did not make either, but according to um, our business logic, we're saying that this is not too far off. So it's not as bad as the other one where we colored it orange or darker. We're saying that it's yellow because it's almost there. It's not quite what we wanted. And then we're showing a trend here of the visits over a time period. Now here are a couple more that introduce some history into the context. So this is a little different format. And this metric example, we're saying, okay, we're looking at people who are influencers on the internet and how many posts did we get? And so we're looking at a time period of 30 days, so a month. We had a target of 50, and so 38 is not close to 50, so we're coloring this the darker color, because we didn't make our goal. And we're providing some history around this as well, and it depends on how you look at the history. So if you look at last month, we're also way down from last month, so that's not good either. But if you look at the same time period last year, we're actually up 70%. So depending on how you look at it, this could be a good metric or it could be a bad metric. So the KPI gives you both of those options of interpretation. And this is an example of where a higher metric is better. In the second example of this format, this is an example where a lower metric is better. And in this case, we've got green across the board because we're looking at the number of questions submitted on the portal, and our goal was 15. We wanted to go down, and we got 12, which is even lower. So there's a green there. The window is 30 days, so we look at the last 3-day period, which is the last month, and we're also down 10% from last month, so that's good. And then year over year, we're down 156%. So green across the board. The lower metric in this case is better, and the KPI gives you the measurement, but also the context and the history, and tells an even better story about that measurement. These next two examples are presented in two different ways. So I've got two examples in a set of two methods of presenting them. The first one is simpler visually, and the other one has more context, and they provide some data in a snapshot for one particular window of time. So here the example is the average length of the visit, and we're segmenting them into groups of more than 5 minutes down to the 0 to 1 minute range. And if you look at the 0 to 1 minute range, which is in purple, there's a large number. That's the largest segment of visitors. So we could interpret from that that, well, there's a lot of people that are coming into the page and bouncing away. But if we look at that compared to all the other ones that are more than 2 minutes or more, those combined are more than half. So this presentation of the metric can allow you to suppose that this is a good thing, that the people that are visiting the website, this particular visit length, are staying longer, even though there's a large number. If we called that particular number out separately, that 1 minute number, and showed that percentage as almost half, just by itself, then that really wouldn't tell the entire story. But this graphic shows you that compared to the other segments, it's actually less than half, and the other ones have a bigger impact. It does not show you the trend though. So what it does, it shows you the spread and the breakdown detail, but doesn't show you the trend. You could present it differently in this way. You could look at the average visit length. So that we're saying in this KPI we have a target of 2 minutes, and we got a 1.8, so almost there, not quite, so not a green, but it's a yellow, and that's over the period of 7 days. And so this is an indication of a current metric against a target within a certain window showing the trend. So same data but presented a completely different way with the average, and you can tell a completely different story. Here's a second set of examples, this frustration level. So how do you measure this? And we're going to go off of some anecdotal data and estimate from a survey. So we're going to rate frustration level on the portal from a survey. And this is this shows the spread and breakdown detail of low, medium, and high. So it does not show the trend. So just by itself, this snapshot doesn't tell you what's been going on. If things have been improving, have they been declining? We don't know. But if we present it in a different way, here we're saying that our target was medium frustration and the frustration level was medium overall, and that's the window of a quarter. And again, this one's across the board green because we've been improving. We're up almost 6% from last quarter, and year over year we're up 27%. So this is an example of where the metric has been abstracted and presented to you in a KPI that tells the story that you want to be able to tell. So why can't we get all this information from SharePoint out of the box? And also, what happened between SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013? This was a particular inflection point for analytics within the SharePoint platform. So we used to have the Web Analytics Service application. This was a shared service application that was entirely devoted to SharePoint Analytics. And unfortunately, it got pared down a lot in SharePoint 2013. And now it's wrapped into the search service application instead. So that's where you'll find it. And this works the same way in Office 365, although there are some additional analytics there's some additional analytics augmentation coming to 365 and SharePoint 2016, but it's not as much as we had before. So what does this all mean? So one thing is that if you were familiar with the Web Analytics web part in SharePoint, that's not supported anymore, so that's gone. And there have been a lot of reports that have been removed: browser traffic, top users, and referring URL. So these are things that you would normally find in an analytics tool that are not there in SharePoint anymore. Some more changes. When users interact with content in SharePoint 2013, for example, when the user clicks a link or presses a button or views a document, these actions are stored as usage events. And the usage events are counted and analyzed. There's a recommendations algorithm within analytics processing the counts and analyzes the usage events, and the information is added to the search index and the reporting database. So these are the things that we can expect to be able to leverage in SharePoint 2013. We can sort search results by hit. We can have search results influenced by the priority of an item. We can recommend content. The clicks and views, of course, are counted for each document. And there are visual indicators and usage numbers based on the number of views and number of unique visitors. But more overall, the engine is now extensible for third-party solutions. So some of the tools could take advantage of this extensibility. But what do we get out of the box to report on? So the usage, this report is showing historical usage information about the site collection or site, and that includes things like the number of views, the number of users. So we could use this to identify usage trends and determine times of high and low activity. This is available for site collections and for sites. But that's it on the non-search side. On the search side, we can look at the queries in search, the top queries by month and day, abandoned queries. That's a good one to look at to see what people are searching for but not finding. And no result queries, so things that that people typed in as a query and no results came back, not even irrelevant things, but absolutely nothing. And query rules. So that's how often the query rules trigger and how many dictionary terms they use and how often users click on the promoted results. We also get some analytics within libraries. So we get most views by unique users, and most recommendation clicks. So we can see this when we click on the most popular items button in the ribbon. But that's out of the box. Here we're going to start looking at the analytics tools, the third-party analytics tools that we looked at for the engagement. So The requirements, we had to set out a set of requirements, and the first category is compatibility. So a tool for the intranet for MyCorp Town Analytics will require compatibility with or the extensibility to support traffic delivered through SharePoint, obviously, and in specific, SharePoint 2013. So every tool I evaluated in this engagement is compatible with SharePoint 2013, and that's on-premise versus SharePoint Online. Some have more compatibility, of course, but as a baseline, each of them has that particular compatibility. In the category of awareness on the requirements, in order to provide the most visibility into the intranet, a tool for analytics, according to the communications group, should be specifically aware of traffic, content, and actions related to not only SharePoint, but Citrion, because this is what they're using for their social intranet components. And they remember we said that the internet focused a lot on video as well. They use Brightcove for their video cloud. So what does this mean? So the tool that we look at should either be natively aware of these commonly used content delivery and social components, or be extensible to include or assimilate data from these systems. So I can tell you right away that not every tool could handle this. But at the very basis, every tool that I looked at pre-qualified was compatible with SharePoint 2013. So along the category of content segmentation on the requirements, the administrators of the intranet would like to segment the data by the types of content consumed. So this would require support for things like metadata and file extensions. So we want to classify content on the intranet. How are we going to do that? We're going to tag it. We might have a certain content type or piece of metadata on it, and it might be a particular file extension as well within SharePoint. And the tool needs to be aware of this. This goes beyond just someone viewing a page and having it tracked. We're talking about categorizing that page or the document, whatever it is, and taking into account the data about the content to further segment it. That's content segmentation. We also have visitor segmentation, and some of this came up in that whiteboarding exercise that I talked about earlier. The client wanted to dig deeper into the nature of the visits and their visitors. So with analytics tools, your users are visitors and their sessions are visits. And along with a desire to segment the content consumed within the intranet, they need to examine various properties of the visits and the visitor as well. So these attributes as a requirement of the visit or visitor should be supported. What platform are they using? Is it a mobile device? What browser are they using? What's the date and time of their visit? Can it understand what a session is, which is a group of visits and during that's contiguous? And then what would be really good as a requirement is if it understood SharePoint 2013 user profile properties and user audience memberships, as well as AD user accounts, attributes about that user account in AD, and group membership in AD. And then along the category of extensibility and requirements, in order for dashboards or other display and recalculation of the raw metric data into KPIs and reports, if the tool has an API or REST interface, that should ideally be provided so that we can reuse those metrics in other methods, not just manually, but automatically and programmatically. Absent this capability, presentation of the data would be limited completely to the capabilities within the tool's interface itself. In other words, you just couldn't create your own stuff with the data from the tool. As far as email campaigns, this will help gauge effectiveness and response from the emails sent to the employees with the intent of driving traffic to the website, to the intranet, at various times and for varying reasons. And that happens through this construct of UTM tags that are built into things like marketing emails. And in this particular case, they're using constant contact. So the idea of a requirement that the tool should ideally support UTM tag tracking was a helpful one. And then we have the pricing requirement, everyone's favorite usually. I didn't get exact price quotes for all of these tools. We talked in ballpark figures for the purposes of a first round evaluation. And the data points that I used, because different tools use different data points to price out their product, we used a measurement of approximately 1 million page views a month, and approximately 30,000 users of the intranet. So some tools go on page views, some tools go on users, some tools don't go on either of those. But we use those baselines to get ballpark pricing. So let's get into the tools themselves. First one we have, we're going to look at Google because it's the tool that was already in place. And most people look at Google Analytics because of its price, which is $0. So that's very attractive. But there are certainly drawbacks to consider against its capabilities, as with any tool, of course. So when we looked at Google Analytics, and for all these tools, I'm going to talk about the trackable attributes and actions and the analysis method of the tool. So with Google, if everyone understands what JS tags are, they're usually something, they're JavaScript, and they are usually something that you add to your SharePoint master page, which enables the page to talk to the analytics tool. So this is actually how Google Analytics works. And on the left are the things that the tool can track and the actions that it can track. Things to consider with Google Analytics that the data is often based on a subset or percentage of sessions. So you get what you pay for, right? It's free, and Google wants to sort of minimize the amount of horsepower that it needs to process your data. So this is a practice of reporting trends in the subset to reduce processing time. And this can occur in the reports or even during the data collection itself. So it might not even collect the data in the first place. So that's something to be aware of. This could be okay for some people, but not okay for others. It may be a dead set requirement that you need to be completely comprehensive and look at all the data. Here are some screenshots of Google Analytics. I'll let you just take a look at these briefly. This is an audience overview. Here's active users. Here's a cohort analysis. We've got new versus returning behavior here. Here's frequency and recency report. And we have engagement behavior. Here's a really useful one, which is users flow. So this is how the users flow through the website in a path. So for each tool, I'm going to have a screen like this as well, some key benefits and some key drawbacks. For Google in-page analytics, which is loading the page with the analytics laid on top of it, that's really awesome. The other really great thing is it's free. You can't beat that with a stick. But one of the drawbacks is that Google doesn't know what SharePoint is. So it's not going to get as in-depth as some other tools will that actually are SharePoint aware. And for the purposes of this evaluation, not just generically, there are no video metrics. There's no Citron integration for the client. There's a lot of customization that's required, and administratively, there's a shared login or Google account that's required. So you have to share that username and password around. If someone gets upset and wants to leave the company, they could delete all your analytics because they share that account. And then keep in mind also that Google is Google and it takes ownership of your metrics data, and they may use it how they see fit. So keep that in mind. But the interface is really nice. There's a lot of nice Sparkline KPIs. It is real time and it's cloud-based, so there's no infrastructure that's required on your end. But you are sending stuff across the wire to Google. So got to think about that. The next tool we looked at was Angelfish from Actual Metrics. And if anyone's familiar with Urchin, this is where this originated. And this relies on IAS logs instead of JavaScript tags, although that is supported, but it's not required. So you feed the IAS logs into Angelfish, and then it will come out with these trackable attributes and actions. This also means that if it relies on the IAS logs, you can use past IAS logs to get historical data before day 0 when you implement the tool. So from my observation, this tool appears to be in its infancy at this point in time. A lot of the features that were talked about are in the works or are slated for a future release. And the audience for this tool seems to be more technical users than business users. And what I was looking for was a tool that would be accessible by the communications group. So that's something to consider. The interface seemed like it would be more difficult to navigate for someone outside of IT. Here's a screenshot here of Angelfish. And this is a dashboard. So again, here, a lot of these things might be highly useful for public-facing websites if Microsoft hadn't deprecated support for that in SharePoint. But again, Angelfish is not SharePoint aware. It doesn't deal anything with search queries, as Google did not either. I forgot to mention that. There's no video metrics here as well, no Citron integration. There's some customization that is needed for visitor attributes um, to be customized. There is separate hardware that's required for this, but there are some great benefits. There's unlimited nested segments, so we can keep paring down the data as much as we want. There's spike analysis, so something interesting occurs, and we can look into that and see a particular increase in traffic at a particular time um, and segment that. We can look at broken links, so stuff that leads to nowhere, that's helpful. And there's 6 different tracking methods for visitors, so that's very helpful as well. But again, it doesn't know what SharePoint is, so that's an interesting consideration. If anyone was familiar with Omniture in a past life, this has been purchased by Adobe since and has evolved into Adobe Analytics. And it's a cloud-only software as a service offering. So the tracking here occurs real time by those JavaScript-based page tags, which lead to these trackable attributes and actions on the left. And Adobe's put a lot of effort into the user interface to enable visualization of data. So I have some screenshots here. And you can see it's a really robust interface, which is not surprising for Adobe. This is the site overview. It's got a lot of KPIs and trending and charts and maps. So that's pretty cool. But again, these things might be a little more useful for a publicly facing website. Adobe also is not SharePoint aware, but it doesn't require any infrastructure because it's all cloud-based, so that's low overhead. It is real-time. It's got those nice Sparkline KPIs, but again, no video metrics, no Citron integration, which is very important for the client. It does not do those search queries either, and there is some customization, of course, for those visitor attributes. So even though it's completely in the cloud and it's easy to maintain, it doesn't know what SharePoint is, and it's got some of these drawbacks. Here, the next one is SharePoint Analytics for SharePoint. They use their own analytics engine separate from SharePoint and separate from the server logs. So this one has no way to evaluate historical data. From day 0, you will then have data to analyze. It installs as part of SharePoint, but it uses its own SQL database. So the analysis method is its own and leads to a lot more trackable attributes and actions because of that, including those click paths, which are very helpful. And I did observe that they seem very committed to the product. It's adapted from 2007 through 2010 and 2013. However, they have yet to incorporate any social metrics. So that's something that hopefully is on the horizon for them. Here's some screenshots. Here's a browser's report. We got a dashboard here. Very nice interface here. And it's actually presented within SharePoint, if you notice. So that could be helpful as well. There's a visits trend report. Tracking workflows is very cool. That's something that not a lot of the tools are able to do. You can actually display the web analytics in a web part. That's very meta. Displaying analytics on SharePoint within SharePoint, which you could then measure the analytics on. It is aware of SharePoint, so it's not just actions by visitors, but it can also understand unused content. So the other tools that are not SharePoint aware, they can't tell you what content wasn't used because there was never an action performed on it to send information to the analytics tool. It is real time. There is no additional hardware required because it installs on the same SharePoint servers. But there is no social tracking, and you must go to central admin to access the reports. So that doesn't make it very democratized. And there's no external link tracking because once the activity leaves the server, it leaves the purview of this tool. Next one here is Cardiolog from Intlock, and this is designed specifically for SharePoint and covers all aspects of usage that has to do with portals, extranets, collaboration sites, and social. It is installed in its own separate SQL server, so that's a bit of overhead there. The analysis occurs by JavaScript tags. IIS logs can be imported as well, though, and it does not rely on SharePoint's built-in analytics or logs. So you can kind of have the best of both worlds here. And this does lead to a lot of trackable attributes and actions on the left. That's a big list there. This tool has great in-page feedback options. So we can set up our pages in SharePoint to display message bars. We can have a little survey on the page saying, was this helpful or not? Ask a couple different questions. And also you can set up this concept if you're familiar with user testing, A/B multivariate testing. This tool supports that. So that could be helpful when trying to analyze a method for conveying content on your site. Here's an analytics report. We got some screenshots here, a goal funnel report, traffic sources dashboard. There's an entrance pass report, so where do users come into the site, dimensioning by visitor department, a map overlay, so these users are in different countries, where are they coming from, who's online right now is an interesting one. And then here's selecting a reporting period, where they give you a calendar interface to select that. And here we get into Citrion Groups Activity Report. So this does support the Citrion. This is Group Members Report in Citrion, Item Popularity in the Social, Posts Report in the Social. So key benefits here, we've got the Citrion integration, and it does display within SharePoint, so that's helpful. We can create some custom dashboards. There's direct integration with AD and SharePoint user profiles, which looks very helpful. There's page metadata. It does require separate hardware. So again, needing a separate server is a bummer, but it does know about SharePoint, and Citrion integration is key for the client. So the next one we look at is PWIC SharePoint Analytics. This has highly evolved UI for reports, and it's used by activating a feature per site collection. So we do use those JavaScript-based page tags, which lead to a lot of trackable attributes and actions on the left there. The installation of PWIC is very streamlined. They give you actually a pre-configured server image that's delivered to you, and the tool automatically populates the tracking code into all relevant areas. So that's very helpful, very easy to deploy. Here's a screenshot here of the dashboard. Very, very highly evolved UI here. This is a page titles report. This is a visitor profile report. It's a lot of information about the user. There's a visitor log. There's a site search report, so that's helpful as well, that search reporting. So we've got real-time viewing of the actions. It doesn't take time to process all these things. We've got those nice Sparkline KPIs to look at, and it's very easy to set up. There is a separate hardware required, but that ease of setup might mitigate that. It does not have the social tracking. So knowing about SharePoint, it does know about SharePoint, so that's very helpful. Next, we've got Web Trends. This closely aligns with Microsoft. Web Trends is a marquee vendor for web analytics. You've probably heard of them. This uses the JavaScript tags, which are encrypted in transit to the tool, which lead to a lot of trackable attributes and actions there on the left. Web Trends seems to have a particular focus on adoption and engagement, which is good. This matches up with our goals. Their pitch is consumable and actionable insights for business users. So their audience is those business users, not the technical people. It does have a well-polished UI as well. Here's a screenshot of some of the reports, and you can see that they've really tailored this to be engaging in terms of a report, in terms of this as a dashboard. So here we've got key benefits. It's cloud-based, so there's no overhead there. It's targeted for consumption by the business users. It's got plugins for Brightcove, which is good. And it's got that Citrion integration. So those are two wins there for the client. It is a feature-heavy product, though, so only a small subset of feature set is required for this client. So their focus, even though it's to provide stuff for the business users, not the techies, there's a lot that's thrown at those users. So it may be hard to sift through some of that. I'm not sure how that's going to go over. So considering all this, which would you choose? I'm going to tell you what happened. And part of this is that I put together a comparison matrix, and this is harder than you think. So examine key features of each tool, and to the highest degree possible, held them up against each other in a matrix spreadsheet where I tried to line up the tools against each other on those key features. The areas of comparison are here. I'll let you look at those. But which tool did I end up choosing? The answer actually is the cardiolog from Intlock. And why is that? Well, I recommended this based largely on the feature set offered by Cardiolog. So how those features aligned with the business needs of the client and tracking activity on the internet. Content as well as activity is monitored, so the lack of action can be tracked on documents and items as well as the actions. And the in-page feedback mechanisms were very attractive as well. This provides an additional way for users to contribute information regarding their engagement with content and their overall user experience. Citron analytics were built in and would require little to no customization. And Brightcove analytics should be able to be integrated via their API and brought into Cardiolog. So that's a very good thing as well for the client. Other tools did not have as extensive a feature set to support the client's requirements, and a lot of them were less SharePoint specific. Um, a lot of them did not allow for business users to consume the reports easily, and some of them cost too much. And I will tell you that WebTrends was the runner-up, but that did cost a little more. And again, it was sort of like using a cannon to kill a mosquito. It's a very robust tool, and the client's needs didn't necessarily line up to that degree of that higher level of functionality. So how does the story end? Well, what tool did they choose? They chose Google Analytics. Um, and they lived happily ever after because what happened was they decided to address some of their near-term goals. They had reports that were based on certain metrics, and some of the KPIs will be able to be developed from those metrics manually. Um, and so instead of trying to buy a tool right away, they decided that they would try to augment the current information that was being sent over through those tags to Google Analytics. So they asked us to help them with that and integrate the SharePoint user profile data to track things like a user's department and sending over those key attributes, as well as some classifications of the pages being viewed. So we did help them initiate that process. But I do want to warn you again with the Google Analytics that complete user information such as like first and last names, those should not be sent over at Google Analytics because the data may be reused by Google in any way that they see fit. So steps should really be taken so that any confidential information or trade secrets are not accidentally injected into the Google ecosystem. Those could be in the form of meta tags, page titles, things you might not think of that get sent over and into this analytics engine could become part of Google's purview. So wrapping up, I think we're doing okay on time. I do want to just do these couple disclaimers that the views in this presentation are not endorsed by any of the product vendors that I'm talking about, and I warrant no accuracy in the data presented. So things may have changed in between the time that I evaluated these and now, so you do want to do your own research. And although this is the more important one, although I concluded that Cardiolog is the leading candidate for this particular engagement, this does not by any means signify that other um, tools or vendors should be disqualified by me or my company in future evaluation of other tool candidates. Because really, in fact, another tool might be the best that we could recommend to a completely different future client depending on their needs. One of these other tools may map up very nicely and much better than Cardiolog to their particular um, needs. So I guess at this point we'll run into questions, and I will thank you for attending Unity Connect Online and for joining me today.